Pope Francis has invited you to take a 7-year journey towards something that he is calling ecological economics. And when Pope Francis invites you into that journey, he's actually inviting you to do something that God has already invited you to do in Leviticus 25. So when God lays out God's economic system in Leviticus 25, it's on this 7-year cycle as well. We want to read just a little bit from that, Leviticus 25, starting with verse 1. The Lord said to Moses on Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give to you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years, sow your fields, and for 6 years, prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a Sabbath of rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vine. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year, that will be your food. For yourself, your manservant and maidservant, the hired worker and temporary residents who live among you, as well as your livestock and all the wild animals in the land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten." So you can see how Pope Francis's vision is already lodged deep inside what we sometimes call a Sabbath economics, which is this 7-year cycle that the Bible imagines where we work for 6 years and then we take a 7th year. All of those 6 years' work is in view of that 7th year of rest. And I want to notice 3 things about that 7th year as you embark on your own 7-year journey. The first is that 7th year, its primary purpose is to put a pause on all practices that tax and tire creation. Put a pause on all practices that tax and tire creation. And of course, when we think about all of the ways that we depend on the creation around us, we, like the Israelites in Leviticus 25, immediately begin to ask questions like, well, what are we supposed to eat in that 7th year? What are we supposed to eat? God addresses this in what we read, but also later in the passage as people express their own anxiety about what it might mean to fully pause just for a year from practices that tax and tire creation. And God says, well, your needs will be provided for. In the part that we read, God says the land does produce naturally, and the things that the land produces naturally, that's what I'm asking you to live off. Later in the passage, God will say, actually, some of those 6 years you're going to be blessed with abundance, and you will save that abundance in order to make possible this rest. And what I hear God saying to us about this 7-year journey of ecological economics is that in that 7th year, we're going to practice provision without profit. We're being called to a practice of having enough, but not of having too much, not of seeking extra. Provision, but not profit. And as you embark on this journey of trying to bring your own economic practices, your own wealth and wealth management into alignment with God's vision for an economy that does not tax or tire creation, I want to ask you to imagine what might it mean to have a 7th year of this process dedicated towards provision without profit. A 7th year where maybe you give up all profits in order to enact this year in which we do not tax entire creation. And what might it mean to have the economy that you're building in these 6 years always having its eye towards that 7th year of rest, that 7th year of Sabbath? There's one last principle that I think is important as we embark on this journey together. We're called to pause from all sorts of practices that tax entire creation. We're called periodically to pause from profit and to rest at the level of provision. But we're also called in this passage, if you might notice at the end, to a rest for ourselves, but a rest that does not stop with ourselves, a rest that extends, the Bible says, to your manservant and maidservant, your hired worker, your temporary residents who live among you, as well as your livestock and the wild animals in your land. I hear God trying to cover everyone in this passage, right? God is talking about a rest that extends to your support staff. God is talking about a rest that is for people on your payroll, but also contract workers, right? Temporary workers. God says it's not actually just about those who are working well in your system, whether they're payroll or contract, but actually I also want you to have an imagination for the way that this ecological economics can bless the temporary residents in your land, those who have come from other countries, both documented and undocumented, as they are working alongside you in these 6 years. How can you extend this vision of Sabbath rest, of having enough, of provision but not profit, even to them? And then, because God knows that we are always tempted to think about people over animals in place, God says, and your livestock, and not just those animals that you consider yours, but the wild animals that I consider mine too. In God's economy, all of those creatures, the land included, the land where God started with, all of those creatures will have rest. So as you embark on this 7-year journey, trying to reimagine an ecological economics for 7 years at the invitation of the Pope, I want to invite you to think about this invitation that God has made to you in Leviticus 25, to let all of that work and all of that visioning be in view of a radical 7th year in which nothing happens that year that taxes or tires creation, in which you learn to rest with provision and to yield the need for profit, or perhaps to use the profits of that year to make these other parts of the vision possible, and in which the kind of rest, the kind of wholeness and restoration that comes from those practices is extended not just to you and yours, but actually to everyone: support staff, payroll, peers, contract workers, people sojourning in the land around you, all of God's creatures. That rest and restoration is really put forward for all. That's the invitation. And we're grateful that you're going on this journey with us. Good luck.